right? I always say separate the artificial intelligence from the human intelligence. AI is a technology, it's a tool. You're going to use it. How can you use it to augment the HI?
Welcome to the Tech Leaders Podcast AI series. Is the hype justified? In this captivating 5-part podcast series, Professor Kerensa Jennings and I will deep dive into the recent hype behind AI technology and seek to challenge how profound its impact on society and business really will be. Throughout the series, we'll be joined by 5 leading experts, including industry pioneers, visionaries, and entrepreneurs who have been at the forefront of AI advancements and have real-world insight into the deeper implications and possibilities that AI is bringing to our world. And for this one, we had to bring in the cavalry. I am joined by none other than the magnificent Professor Kerensa Jennings. For those of you who are not familiar with this name, Kerensa was a guest all the way back in episode 21, back in December 2020, and then co-hosted our successful Women in Tech series last year. We had an absolute blast collaborating, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have her join us once again. Kerensa is a best-selling author, an amazingly talented storyteller, and has worked for the likes of the royal family, the royal household, BBC, Sky, and currently BT, where she is the Group Director of Data Platforms. I am so looking forward to this one, and what a guest we have to kick things off. Priya Lakhani OBE is the founder and CEO of Century Tech, an artificial intelligence education technology company that develops AI-powered learning tools for schools, colleges, universities, and employers across the world. In 2008, Priya left her successful, high-flying career as a barrister to become an entrepreneur, to start a cooking sauce business, something totally unrelated to the legal profession. Fast forward to 2023, Priya is now a seasoned entrepreneur and an ambassador for the AI tech innovation world in the UK. Fast forward to 2023, and Priya is now a seasoned entrepreneur and ambassador for AI and tech innovation in the UK, especially within education. Priya is a really big personality, is a fantastic advocate of AI and education, just an all-round great person. We really enjoyed talking to Priya. What an incredible way to start the AI series. It's Priya Lakhani. Priya, we are so excited to talk to you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
I'm so excited to be here, Gareth and Kerensa.
Yeah, lovely to have you.
Absolutely. Kerensa and I have been so excited about this. I know you guys know each other, so this is a bit like a reunion for old friends. We'll be stuck in the middle, but Kerensa and I and our team have been talking about doing an AI series. We think you're the perfect guest to open up this series. There's so many issues, things we're excited about. There's lots and lots of things to talk about around the evolution of artificial intelligence technology and the impact on society, and I know education, which I know is something which is very close to your heart. There's loads of things to talk about. Let me just open with this big question. What are you most excited about in relation to artificial intelligence and where it's going, Priya?
It's such a good question. And rather than giving you a more technical answer, I think what I'm really excited about is the fact that the masses, the public, have all become engaged with it in some way. But that's what I'm most excited about because, you know, prior to ChatGPT's launch in December, there were many entrepreneurs who were building artificial intelligence technology, developing the technology and talking about it and its application. And, you know, when you're talking to people, obviously you have the usual suspects that are very interested in what you're talking about and how that can change the world, whether it's in education, in healthcare, in security, just in retail, and, you know, as a consumer. But it was always a little bit difficult to cut through, if you like, to the wider public. Let's look, this is how this technology works, and this is how it's going to transform the way in which we live, in which we, you know, we work. And so the thing that I'm most excited about, because it's so recent, is the launch of ChatGPT meant that in one morning, the social channels were going absolutely wild. What's also happening is there's a debate about artificial intelligence with the wider public. This sort of technology that captures the imagination of more people will ensure that there's a bigger and a better debate on things like the ethics of AI, how we can use the technology. And in order to be better consumers of artificial intelligence, we need to understand it. And so that's what I'm most excited about, because being in education, and I know it's slightly different in terms of what I've been doing in the last decade in AI and education, but being involved in education is not just for children, right? It's about lifelong learning. It's ensuring that we all understand all of the relevant issues, and artificial intelligence is definitely one of them. So Gareth, that's what excites me the most, is the fact that it's become headline conversation. It's the fact that you decided, right, we're going to do an AI series and it's going to be specifically on this subject. The fact that you're doing that, the fact that the mass media are talking about it, the fact that it's headline news means that now we can have a really big conversation about the technology and its future and its opportunities, but also, what are the risks? How do we mitigate those? And I think that's really important.
And so when you started out doing Century Tech, you did this thing, you had this incredible vision. It's almost, I always see it as bionic technology, because you are leveraging the power of the human and the technology. So you've got the human and the machine, because you combine neuroscience with artificial intelligence. Just tell us a little bit about how it works and how you got that vision off the ground, because at the time it was so extraordinary and so peculiar for people to get their heads around. But then look what you've gone on to do.
You say it really nicely. I think it was more like, I thought it was extraordinary and everyone else said, what are you thinking? Why are you doing? You're crazy. And actually, there are a lot of tech leaders and people who have ideas that they would really love for those to come to fruition, who they're in that point right now. They're at that juncture where you have this idea, you understand technology, you understand, whether it's AI, whether it's the blockchain, whatever it is, this amazing product or idea, and how many people will come to you and say that's absolutely crazy. So look, how it came about was, I have 2 young children. And so at the time I had a 2-year-old and a newborn, and they were at preschool. And I was really, really interested in, what they were doing at school. I was interested in education. While this was going on, I was sitting on the advisory board for the former Secretary of State for Business Innovation and Skills, Vince Cable. And on his advisory board, there was a meeting where Matthew Hancock, who used to be the bridge minister between Department for Education and Biz, he came into a meeting and he said a number of students, he gave a number where those students do not get the required minimum grades in maths and English at the end of formal education to get a job, right? And so at this point, you needed a C. You needed a C at GCSE at 16 years old to then go on to do an apprenticeship, to go and, do vocational training, to go on to any university, to do any sort of formal qualification afterwards. And the number was 20%. So 20% of our country cannot read, write, or do maths well enough to get a job at the end of formal education. And that was really shocking to me. It was shocking to me because I was busy doing something else at the time. I had a different venture. I was running a food company called Masala, which was a fresh sauces company in supermarkets. And with every sauce that we were selling, we were feeding a homeless person a hot meal. We were providing vaccines, pentavalent vaccines, through the Gavi Alliance. And we were building schools, in slum areas. And so the idea was, because I'm East African Indian, I want to provide healthcare, education and nutrition to people. Because if you have all three, then there's a chance at least that you can go out there, you can leave that sort of poverty trap that you're in, take your family out of there. But you see, I was doing this and building schools in Commonwealth countries, and Commonwealth countries tend to follow the British model. And so it was a real shock to the system that day that the minister walked in and said 20% of our nation, are not getting these required grades, because I thought, if it's not working here, there's no way it's working where I've been working for a few years, trying to change things and sitting there, really naively sort of thinking, oh, look, this is changing the world. And so it was a real wake up moment. And I thought, okay, how can we solve this problem? Now, fortunately, I was sitting on this advisory board. And so I was able to ask lots of questions. Why are 20% of children unable to pass?
Yes.
What's going on? Because I remember going to school and thinking, hang on, we speak English, and how we're taught English, maths and all of that at school. And so what was so interesting was not many people had a direct answer to the question. So I went to schools. I went to some of the most challenged schools in the country, and I went to some of the most, sort of best performing on the league tables, if you like, in the independent sector. And although every school was different, every child is different, every teacher is different, I could see the delivery of education hadn't changed much from when I went to school. So there was very much sort of a one size fits all. Teachers would say, we're going home at the end of the day from our day job, and we actually feel slightly disheartened because we know we could have maybe differentiated a little bit more for that other kid over there. We don't have the time and the resources to personalise for every single child in every single period throughout the day. And when you've got 20 to 30 kids in a classroom. And so I thought, firstly, personalisation is really interesting. And people are talking about that, and they're talking about AI at the same time. Think about a decade ago, right? So think about your phones, what was on your smartphone.
Yes.
Think about choosing a film. Think about shopping on Amazon. Think about the web basket. Think about recommendations and nudges. Think about investing. What might you want to invest in? Everything that we started searching for as a consumer, we were being recommended items. And I thought, well, hang on, we're being personalized in all these very consumer type ways. What about our education being personalized? And there's this weird thing, there's this big thing called AI and big data that lots of clever people are talking about. I don't know anything about it. And so why don't I go and see if that can help? And the second issue was really interesting, by the way, because it sounds very unrelated, but it's not. So teachers would say they spend more than half of their time marking, assessing, and doing admin than teaching. There's lots of reasons why we've recently had teacher strikes, right? And pay is obviously a very, very big deal. But what's so interesting is that, well, it was no surprise that these teachers are tired and exhausted, because there is no other industry where you have an individual. Think about a salesperson, for example, right? Where you say, here are your KPIs for the end of the year, but then you don't give them the tools to achieve those KPIs. Whereas we're sending teachers into classrooms every single day to do their jobs. Their KPIs aren't revenue. Their KPIs are, opportunities for the children, right? And their education, much bigger, much more important. And yet, what tools are we giving them? And they said our workload is huge. And so I thought, okay, well, hang on, that's related, because when the devil's in the detail, right? They're spending a lot of time data gathering. If we think about it really simply, they're giving you a test every week. They're now marking that test 30 times. And then the teachers by day and then data analysts by night, because they've got to sit there and figure out, well, who got the test wrong and why did they get something wrong? So the idea then came about as to, look, what is this technology and how can we then use and leverage this technology to solve these problems? And it was very much a problem-oriented approach.
Yeah, which is the best way of doing innovation, actually.
Yeah, and so many of us have those ideas, right? Which is really, really interesting. And so, we're often in a situation where we think, okay, there's a service or there's a product, it could be better, right? Or actually there's a gap in the market. I mean, I do think every company is a technology company and every company is a data company. And somebody once said to me, what do you mean? I run a hair salon. And I said, yeah, you're a technology company because you've got a website, you've got a booking system, you're using a CRM probably, you've got loyalty things, you've got all sorts of things, that you can think about using and leveraging technology. And data in terms of, this is not an audience where I need to explain why data is important, I think, but all the reasons to make your business thrive and for you to actually enjoy your business more. Really, really interestingly, I find as a business leader, we enjoy our businesses more when we're better informed, right? In terms of what's happening and how customers are behaving.
So can I ask you, Priya, you've done a lot in your career, but you were trained as a barrister, you set up an FMCG company, and then you kind of found your why. I've heard you say that you want to change the world quite a few times, which I think is brilliant, by the way.
Which is so naive.
No, I think it's fantastic.
I'm still trying.
I think there's not enough people in the UK who think like that. I mean, it's very much a Silicon Valley line, isn't it? But I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I think you genuinely will. You clearly found your why, and you got to that journey. Then you got to the end of that journey with Century Tech. Can you tell us about that journey? Why did you why did you move away from being a barrister? Why did you set up your FMCG company? And then why did you ultimately move into AI and education? Yeah,
you guys are being really polite about these questions. Most people are saying, that's crazy. How are you? It makes me like, what do you mean you were a barrister? So actually it all makes sense with this why. So I'm from Cheshire, from a very leafy part of Cheshire in the northwest of England. But I spent all of my long holidays, if you like, in parts of East Africa. So my father's from Nairobi. My mum's from Kampala in Uganda. And so on a lot of these holidays, we would go and see my father's family. His mother, my grandma, was in Nairobi. And it was just really, ever since I was very, very young, I remember being about 5-6 years old. And, you're from this leafy part of Cheshire and then you turn up in Nairobi and you've got a house with your family. And then in the house, you've got servants and the servants are living in servant quarters and you call them your servants. And you can just imagine now putting yourself in that situation, even now as an adult, that just feels very, very wrong. And I was around lots of children, just sort of when you're walking around the streets, etc., where, you know, we have a white Mercedes with a driver, and then there's a nanny, and then there's chefs and everything. In Nairobi, if you're able to afford it, this is how people live. But then around the corner, there are children begging on the street, and they have no idea if they're getting fresh water tomorrow. They're smiling and beaming, and that just really affected me. You know, it's a very, very simple story. So a very, very young age, I was in Nairobi. I was with my parents. My mum remembers this. And I said, Mum, I know why I'm here. And sounds really stupid. I totally get it. And I said, look, I'm here because I want to try and change the world for these children and give them everything that I've got, because I felt really spoiled. And I am really spoiled. And I said, I have all of these things. If I want anything, you know, I was also wearing a ridiculous dress the day that I said that, where my mum put me in this dress, and I hated wearing dresses. So I looked even more like princess-like than you would ever, you know, and I was a real tomboy. I used to want to wear joggers and a hoodie and follow my brother around. And you know, and so it just felt wrong. It just felt really wrong to me. And so I grew up thinking that's what I want to do, you know. And so I was very lucky, because how many people go through their entire lives and can look back right at the end and say every single moment was spent with this kind of drive and this purpose. And the reason why that's really important is that, and it sort of comes into leadership in a sense, is it actually gets you through real times of adversity. You know, when there are massive challenges and you've got your North Star, you've got your direction, it can help you build that resilience. So throughout school, I said, that's it. You know, I mean, when you're a kid, what do you think of when you think of equity and justice, right? You think law, that's what I'm going to do. You know, I'm going to wear the wig and the gown. I'm going to be a barrister. I'm going to change the world. And so that's what I did. And I was told there's no way I'd be a barrister. And it's because you're female, you're from an ethnic minority, you're brown, you're not smart enough to go to Oxbridge. I mean, I didn't want to go to Oxbridge anyway, but you know, that was literally the party line, was look at barristers. They're white men who go to Oxbridge in the 80s and early 90s. So you're never going to make it. But my parents really, really fought for my education. My father would argue with my school and say, you know, she wants to be a barrister, and he'd do with his accent go, you know, what's wrong with that? You know, we're Indian. Indians are all doctors, lawyers and accountants. Like, what do you mean my daughter can't be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant? And all of that led to me going. I went to university. I practiced. I loved it. I really, really loved it. I did not leave because in any way I didn't enjoy the profession. But what I realised a few years in was that I just wasn't moving the dial. You know, it wasn't a career where, as a junior particularly, that I was able to move the dial as much. And I used to do things like, when I was a lawyer, I remember receiving letters from, there was a charity called Action Aid. You sponsor children in parts of Africa. And so these, you know, I was using my salary to do these little sort of charitable efforts, if you like. That's not really what I thought my purpose in life was. So I was working late nights as a lawyer, and I was unable to cook and find time to cook fresh meals because I was just working so hard. And I spotted a gap in the market. There were no Indian ethnic fresh sauces in the supermarket. And when you go to the supermarket, one of the most popular things to buy is pasta and pasta sauce, you know, from the fresh aisle, right? And if you want Asian food, you have to go to the ambient aisle, the room temperature aisle, and they're all pasteurized, right? And I thought, given that curry is the nation's favourite dish, Jamie Oliver's just won some TED prize, right, for saying everyone should eat healthily, which is absolutely right. And he was changing like school meals. And I thought, there's a drive to healthier eating. These things are all pasteurised. Curry is the nation's favourite dish. That doesn't exist on the fresh aisle. I'm going to create the country's first ethnic fresh sauce company. And I'm going to sell it into supermarkets. And for every pot of sauce that I sell from the revenue model, not from the profit model, we'll feed a homeless person a hot meal, we'll provide the meals, and we'll build the schools, right? And so in August 2008, I quit law, thought, right, I'm going to start the food company. And that was it. And so Masala was born. And it was a real learning curve, you know, into business, because I'd never done it before. And I said to my family and my husband, I said, look, if I don't have a supermarket deal by Christmas, I'll quit and go back to law. And it was so interesting because at the time I was being laughed out of the door by everyone. The manufacturer didn't even want to make the sauces for me. Even though I had the money, I didn't even want credit, right? I was like, I'm going to pay you. Nobody wanted to work with me. They said, go home. You know, is your sibling a buyer at Tesco? Is that why you think you can get into supermarkets? You know, and what was so interesting was I was meeting the naysayers, right? And And in technology, we often, because lots of people have ideas and they're pitching constantly, they're meeting venture capitalists, they're meeting investors. You have to build resilience when it comes to hearing no, because no is never, what I've found is it's really binary, right? It's either, yes, I think that this will be great, off you go. I might not give you any money, but off you go, well done, congratulations, good luck. Or it's, no, this is a rubbish idea. It's not going to work. And, when I started Century, I remember in Cambridge, an angel saying, go home and stop wasting everyone's time. You know nothing about AI, right? And this is, after me doing like 6 online degrees in artificial intelligence. So, yeah. And then, so anyway, so that was the Masala story, and it was great. And then it leads to what we spoke about earlier, which is a few years in, millions and millions of meals later, 9 schools, 35,000 vaccines later, I was in this meeting, and that was the wake-up call. I was thinking, oh my goodness, there I am thinking that this food company that I've created is doing all this good, but I just don't believe that the school side, the education side, is achieving the aims that I had set out for them to achieve, because it needs to work here. And if it can work here, then we can get it to work here for every child. If we can level the playing field, then we'll have learned something fundamental to change things long-term elsewhere. But you need to do the work, and not just, I needed to not assume that just having what looked like a replica little school was simply just going to get the outcomes that I'd hoped for.
I love the fact that in both of your business ideas, they both stemmed from problems that you personally were facing or had come across, like you'd actually heard about problems that you wanted to solve and get going with that. So that was a huge driving force. But what you do that most people don't is you actually dramatically changed your own life in order to see those dreams, push those dreams through to fruition, which I think is incredibly brave. And I don't know if many people have quite reflected that back to you, Priya, but just how incredibly brave you are and that resilience that you hinted at. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about just how hard it has been, particularly in the AI field.
Look, it's not been easy. And I know a fair few people, I think all entrepreneurs change their lives radically, because entrepreneurship is not a rational choice. It's not an easy choice, to leave a 9 to 5 or whatever it is, with a stable income, to quit and to go into something actually really risky. If we look at the stats of how many startups fail, and then of those that succeed, how many within the next 2-3 years fail again, and people who switch into companies as well as an employee, but into maybe a more risky environment. These are all kind of bold changes that I say that people make. But yeah, look, on my journey, it's not easy. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be one of those people that's like, wow, look what I've done. It's been really hard. It's really, really hard. And there are moments where, I often say, look, there's 2 feelings that entrepreneurs feel at any one time. And there's nothing in between. You either feel euphoria or terror, right? And the euphoria is really easy. And actually you forget those moments very, very quickly. It's when you're in the terror moments and you're doing a funding round, let's say, and you don't know if you've got the ability to pay salaries in 2 or 3 months' time. You've got term sheets signed by investors, and then they renege on the term sheets that have been signed just before completion. All of the sorts of issues that I think actually many of the tech leaders have been through, and either as the entrepreneur, as the CEO, as the founder, or as a member of the senior team, or as somebody who's about to embark on that journey. But it's about persevering, right? So it's about continuing. That sounds like a really simple thing. But what's really great actually about many entrepreneurs is that they don't give up. We're so wedded to whatever that purpose or that ambition is, that vision that we've seen, because we've seen it. The point is you see it. It's not like some abstract descriptor. Yeah. You visualized it. You know what the world looks like with your solution, whether it's a change the world thing or whatever it is. And you kind of can't imagine life without it, right? That keeps you going. But yeah, it's not been easy. It's not been easy being a female in technology either. And I think that I started, and Kerensa, I must have said this to you maybe 7-8 years ago, but I started absolutely saying, I don't know what you mean when you tell me that I'm a female in tech. Like, why does that make any difference? Yeah. I'm sure that I said that. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've said that on stage somewhere. I don't care. okay, fine, I'm a female, I'm from an ethnic minority. It doesn't matter. Actually, after a decade, it really does. And I've really learned that it's not true what I started out with. In the sense, that's how I felt. And I think actually it was really important that I was naive and I felt that it wouldn't make a difference, because that kept me going for the first 5 years. You just think you're trailblazing through this entire sector, and you're building something, and you're defying anyone that says no to you and anyone that says that you can't. But, you know, a decade on, after £22 million raised, all from high net worths and angels and a couple of different types of institutions like MIT, for example, invested in Century. But I've had no venture capital. And that's not because I haven't tried either, right? It's also because I haven't succeeded in getting venture capital. And maybe that's down to me and whatever else. But some of the comments that you come across, particularly if you're in artificial intelligence. And so just last year, I have a company that is serving organizations across 55 countries in the world, 56 now. And just last year in Los Angeles at a conference, there were lots of people pitching, you know, in a sort of small, kind of not a round table, but sort of like around a coffee table. And this investor, and I'm listening to all their pitches as well. I'm the only female with an AI company. There are a couple of guys with AI companies. Mine's serving 55 countries at the time. Theirs are startups. They have no traction whatsoever, and they're talking about AI. And at the end of it, this investor turns around to me and says, "Sweetheart, what do you really know about artificial intelligence? Can you explain it to me?" Yeah. And so you're sort of sitting there, and obviously what you do is you walk into every room as the chief exec of your company. You don't walk in with your emotions, and that's really controversial. Some people won't like that. But when you run a company and you've got 120 people relying on that company in terms of your staff, and then you've got millions of people relying on your company in the world who you serve, the best thing is really not to sort of try and scream at the person, because it's not going to get you anywhere. And I just, I've always learned, don't burn bridges. Right. It's just a lesson in life. But the thing is, those things happen. I think that things are getting better, Kerensa, from your question, for women. It's a slow journey. It's not exactly where I'd like it to be. I've got a daughter who's 13, and I'd really love that we can sort of push on and get rid of some of the bias and the discrimination, but it definitely exists. The most important thing for any gender listening to this is to just be really conscious of it, in a sense, really open-minded, because the more women who run AI companies, you start to chip away at that bigger problem. You're going to fight that battle by having more successful role models in place. And one thing that I'd love to draw attention to, because I know it's about AI today, is who's the CTO of OpenAI?
A woman,
right? And it's phenomenal that actually only in the last few weeks that's been viral on social media. She's done a lot of media. She's done media before, but I think that is really, really fantastic. She's there for her talent and for her skills, but it's about highlighting those sorts of people and their skill set and their achievements. And I think that then will make the world an easier place for the next generation and the next people who want to go and set up AI companies.
Yeah, 100%. Just wanted to maybe talk about your book for a little bit. How did the book come about? Where did that opportunity come from? And what did you set out to achieve with that book?
Yeah, so the opportunity came about by the publisher asking for coffee and then saying, "We've heard you speak. We've heard all about you. Would you be interested in writing a book about education?" And I said, "Sure."
Love it.
And the coffee was about half an hour long. and then I went back to the office upstairs and was like, "Oh, we're writing a book now." And my team did the usual, which is, "Oh, great, Priya's got another project." And that happens whenever I go on holiday. They're just thinking, "Oh no, we're giving her time to think of other things to do." So that's how it came about. And then what was quite interesting was that I think actually though, in the original coffee, the book was about AI, technology and education, right? So we've built a technology company in education. It's an AI platform, true AI. I say that, because I think it's important, after the Financial Times reported that 40% of companies that use the term AI use it as a marketing term. So I think it's important, and particularly in education where it's a pretty nascent field. So I think that was the original intention. But what was how the book actually then was written and came about, and the sort of themes of the book was that we'd at that point, I think, spent 6 or 7 years speaking to educators all around the world that we had been serving with our platform. And they kept talking about the same issues over and over again. And some of those issues are nothing to do with AI technology in education. They're to do with mental health, the mental health and well-being of teachers, of students, the pastoral care. And actually, I'm a huge advocate for systemic change in education. And I've been talking about that a lot. So instead of writing a book, there's only one chapter on, technology, if you like, per se, like as in here is AI and how it might change education. But actually 9 chapters out of 10 are about essentially your children, and why this needs to change. This is actually what's going on in schools right now. And it doesn't matter it doesn't matter which school your kid's going to. Here are the biggest problems. And it's because I wanted to give a voice to all of those opinions, really, that I'd heard, all of the concerns that I'd heard from educators around the world, and what I had pieced together as what is needed. And also the fact that education is just really slow to change. And all of this really comes from, and it's very related to AI, but in a different way. If we look at artificial intelligence and actually just what happened in the last few months, and GPT-4 is a fantastic way to look at this. Look at what that technology can do after only, let's say, months, in the field, right? If you like, I know we've had access to GPT-3, for example, since the licenses were available. But if you look at ChatGPT, and look at what it can do. Now, think about what it's going to be able to do as it just gets better and better and better. Think about, Bard from Google. Think about Stability AI's products. These are just going to get better. Every second anyone's on those technologies, it's being trained, it's getting smarter.
Sure.
Now, what those technologies can do very well, yes, they make mistakes before everyone shouts at me. I know they make mistakes. I know they make up sources. I've written all about this stuff. And yeah, I get the issues right now. But what they can pass an exam in, because they've tested them on the US bar exams, on the SATs, they've tested them, they pass all of those exams, is they're great at recall and regurgitation. And so that's not a human skill that's going to be as valued. It's still very important, because you can't build many skills if you don't have the ability to recall initially, right? But the point is that our assessment systems and our education systems, and this is, Gareth, kind of where it all kind of pieced together, the UK, the US, Australia, there's a bunch of countries that absolutely ace the OECD. On their report, we ace memorization strategies. So most students use memorization strategies to pass exams, and they can do very well in those countries. Now, relevant to AI is, as AI grows, as data across all sectors becomes more and more important, then what skills do we need these children to leave school with in order to have opportunity and choice when they leave school? And so, there's a big connection actually between artificial intelligence and the technology and where it's going, other technologies, looking at, for example, the metaverse as that grows, as people start to experience it more and more, and as our digital personas take more of a percentage of our engagement time than our physical personas in the physical world, and thinking about where our children will be in 10 to 20 years' time. And then the education system. So the book is actually about the system and why these skills are so important, and why focusing an education system mostly where it's accountable for memorization in terms of exams is the wrong thing to do. And so really it's a call to action, and it's written for parents, not necessarily for technologists or entrepreneurs or anyone. I mean, they're welcome to read it, but it's really written for the masses.
Yeah, sure. I mean, ChatGPT changes everything. I remember when I first saw it, Kerensa, we were talking about this when I first saw it. I remember my heart rate just raising, just elevating. I was like, wow, this is it. Yeah. This is it. This is what they've been talking about for years. It's actually here now. And I just think it's an incredible tool. But it changes so much, doesn't it? Kerensa, you and I were talking about this in the context of the labour market, where different things will become valuable. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely. So the guy you can ask ChatGPT the right questions to write good blogs is more effective than the good blog writer. Do you know what I mean? Because what will this change our value, our perception of what value is? Do you know what I mean? It commoditizes new skills, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I mean, if you think about, for example, when I look at our head of marketing, and she's absolutely brilliant. She's brilliant at all the sort of, when I was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I thought about someone who is a great marketer, she encompasses all of those skills. But what she also is incredibly data driven. because you don't have, if you think about it, right, 30 years ago, so I'm thinking about when I was a bit younger, I'm 42 next month. When I looked at somebody who was fantastic at marketing, and it was, they were focusing on, for example, print media, they're focusing on, advertising campaigns, etc. Because of the way the internet has evolved and these tools have evolved and data collection has evolved, at the time, marketers' skills were very much in sort of the writing. It was very difficult to measure ROI when you were marketing, right? I remember there were sort of famous phrases about, I'm spending like £30 million and 3 million is effective, but I don't know which 3 million, right? Or whichever, whoever said that and whatever numbers it was. I remember that being kind of like a big thing. Whereas actually, there isn't a marketer out there now who wants a very, very serious job in a serious organization that is not very, very proficient in terms of understanding ROI as it comes, in terms of measuring that with data. So data has become important. And so you'll see that these jobs will evolve, these roles will evolve, and these careers will evolve because you have to be able to understand those tools. For example, a marketer who doesn't understand digital marketing and social media is a very, very difficult concept for any company, right? Yeah. So these will evolve. And it's really, I always say to people, we are living with, working with, or building AI, right? Anyone with technology who has access to that, to smartphones, that is what you are doing. You are living with, working with, or building artificial intelligence already.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that's going to grow. And you need to think about, how am I going to evolve my skill set with this technology? If I'm a leader in an organization, how is my organization going to leverage all of these tools, be part of all of these different conversations, be more efficient because of these technologies? And that is not, people often talk about, I've got to do a digital transformation project in my big company. I'm a tech leader in this huge organization and we've got to organize that. And I think, what? That's completely wrong. Digital transformation is not a project. It hasn't got a beginning and an end. It's got a beginning. There is no end. It's an evolution. You've just got to carry on with it. It's part of your culture and you have to invest in it properly.
What do you think are the new human skills that are going to become really important in the next few years?
Kerensa, that's honestly just like the golden question. I'm not even sure about new human skills. I think it's just actually what we've got to do is focus on, what we already understand that humans are brilliant at. And the way that I think the best way to think about this is separate the AI and the HI, right? I always say separate the artificial intelligence from the human intelligence. AI is a technology. It's a tool. You're going to use it. How can you use it to augment the HI? And so there's no simple answer to that question that you ask, because there are many, many human skills that we need to nurture and develop, and where we can leverage technology to make us even better at what we do. And it will be different depending on different use cases and different examples. But critical thinking and being able to think and analyze and question
exactly
is the single most important skill that we teach ourselves and our children. And the reason why is because, and this is something that I'm just really passionate about, and AI very much plays into this, is that the foundation of a democracy relies on, for example, a free press, right? The press are the eyes and ears of the public. Forensic journalism, investigative journalism is incredibly important. Now, when you have people receiving their news and their media no longer from these larger news organizations, and you have your, the ones that are impartial, you've got whatever you've got, but the point is, where it's coming from, but it's coming from trained journalists who are trained to source, have sources as to what they're writing, evidence what they're writing. I know that, again, we're going to get comments on not everyone does that. I get it. But, generally, I'm thinking in principle and in theory,
yes,
if a trained journalist has written a piece, they're going to be thinking about it from a completely different way than a citizen journalist.
Yes.
Now, when most of us are now receiving our news from citizen journalists and from social media channels, but from persuasive technologies that then nudge us as to more and more of what we prefer, more and more what we like, where we kind of go down this rabbit hole of our preferences. And maybe there's a bit of bias in there, and you can see how that can create an issue. This inability for many people to be able to analyse, to think critically, is a real problem. Because what happens is you start to trust, and we've seen this, for example, in other countries where there's propaganda, where there's people talking about elections being rigged, people spreading untruths, if you like. That becomes a real problem.
Sure.
And this is one of the issues with AI technology, this technology that can recommend, that can nudge, that can learn about you, learn about your behaviors. And when particularly those organizations are very much judged by their investors on engagement time, on keeping you hooked, on not really wanting you to log off, then that human skill is more important. And it's incredibly important for children and for young people as they grow up to understand what is the difference between fake news and fact. How do you know? Have you questioned this? And ChatGPT is a really good example. When it first came out and you had these children and these young, well, even not even children, just adults, everyone asking questions, just relying on the answers. It was making up information and sources. One of the teachers in my organisation was absolutely horrified. It made up a quote from Othello when asked it some question about some Shakespeare thing. And then another teacher was absolutely mortified when it stated that William the Conqueror did not win the Battle of Hastings, and he was really upset about that.
I've apparently written a book that I haven't.
Well, there you go. And I think the thing is that over-relying on this, the output, if you like, of these systems, and not being able to judge the source and where it's coming from, again, that sort of critical thinking set of skills, it's going to be incredibly important that we nurture those. And so I think that's the fundamental one. When we're talking about artificial intelligence, what's the one human skill that we need to develop to defend ourselves against some of the negative things that can come from this technology is incredibly important. But obviously, if you have that skill set, you can allow yourself to further thrive with it as well, right? So there's a positive side of things as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. Do you know what? I did a history degree. And history is just all about analysing biased sources and trying to get to the bottom of what the truth is. And after I did it, I'm like, well, I'm never going to use any of these skills in the real world. I just did it because I like history. But as I get older, it's like the skills I learned analysing sources is getting more and more relevant to everything as we go further into this digital world. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, as a lawyer, it's the same with me. I just think, whenever you read anything, it's about what are the facts behind what you're reading. I was in this article recently, and in the comments section, it was extraordinary how many people just suddenly rushed. And one person said, oh, look, she didn't get into the university of her choice, so she's doing, and I said, and in my head, I thought, but I didn't ever want to go to Oxbridge. I mean, why would you assume that? There's nowhere in the story that said I wanted to go there and that I applied and that I didn't get it. Do you see what I mean? So I think what's quite interesting is people read things sometimes how they want to read things. And there's lots of different forms of bias and confirmation bias. But then, can you imagine, sadly, that's something I think that all of us do. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. We all have these biases that come in the way in terms of how we're taking in information. But now couple that with a persuasive technology that's feeding it to you, right? So that becomes a real issue. And if we want to live in a world that is less polarized than where it is now, then this is really, really important. And policymakers really need to take this seriously, and they need to ensure that there is time and resource available in formal educational institutions to be able to focus on those skills and that particular skill set, across the board. I think this is fundamental. And actually, the book does cover this, but it's become even more relevant in the last few months, given that we can now even show how this technology is able to do that.
I mean, there's so many directions we could go in here, but I wanted to pin on that. And I know, Kerensa, this is something you're involved with in relation to policymakers. What sort of role do you see governments, for example, playing in regulating AI and its impact on things like jobs and societies?
So, well, on regulation, I don't know if you're aware, but I received a request from Sir Patrick Vallance just before Christmas to be involved in the review of regulation across every sector, but as it relates to artificial intelligence technologies and sort of broadly digital technologies. And so we were asked to help with that, myself and Matt Clifford, who's the chair of ARIA in the UK. And the review actually just published, and the Chancellor in the budget accepted all 9 recommendations in the review. And what was really, really interesting in that review, the recommendations, there are several recommendations. 2 really interesting ones are the generative AI recommendation, and that is for policymakers to give clarity in terms of law on the input and the outputs of generative AI. And then I think one of the most important sort of regulation recommendations, and this is all came from stakeholders. So just so you know, we spoke to many stakeholders across industries to understand what they needed, because it was really about speaking to the CEOs, the heads of policy, the founders, the CTOs, and saying, you know, where are you stuck? You know, where could you thrive in the UK being an AI technology company? And where are you stuck because of regulation? Or do you need regulation? Do you need clarity? And so we asked all those questions. And the most interesting one was a sandbox recommendation. So a cross-sector sandbox where companies can apply to be in some sort of safe environment, if you like, work with regulators on innovative technologies. And there's, you know, this could relate to medical devices. It could be generative AI. There's this really interesting debate at the moment about watermarking technologies, but that's not quite fully developed yet. So, you know, but is there a regulatory issue that's related to that? And the idea is they would apply and then be in a safe environment, working with regulators, and then work with regulators to develop that regulation as the innovation develops, if you like. So there's always work to be done in regulation. It's difficult because it's always chasing innovation. But I really welcome the review that was conducted and the fact that all the recommendations were accepted by government, because what it did was it really demonstrated support from policymakers about artificial intelligence technology and the fact that they wanted to support the growth and the innovation within the United Kingdom, within our ecosystem. And that's an important message for entrepreneurs, because if you're thinking about building a company, if you're thinking about building a product and leveraging GPT-4, then you need to do that in a country where you know that you understand the laws and the regulations. And so it helps to do that because it puts us on the front foot in the UK alongside some of those countries that have already been quite clear. For example, Japan has been very clear on how regulation, you know, applies to these technologies. And then obviously the US it's evolving, you know, but I think there are some interesting court cases that are out at the moment where we're going to have to watch what the outcomes are to try and understand where the law sits when it comes to the output of, for example, generative AI.
And the best regulation, I think, acts as both enabler and boundary setter. So it helps clarify those boundaries. But
yeah, it's about safe. Yeah. It's about the safe use. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we all want. I mean, you know, all of us, just if we all take our technology hats off for a second, we're all people, we're citizens, we have children, some of us, we have elderly people, vulnerable people that we're, you know, in our care. We want to use technology for our benefit. We want to use it safely.
Yes.
We don't want technology to be dangerous in any way. And you know, I think that's the thing, is that sometimes when you've got the entrepreneurs and the sort of technology industry, people look at it and say, well, hang on, you guys just want to go and build all this stuff that, you know, and it's like, well, actually, I don't think that's the case. You know, I don't think I've ever met a technologist where I've thought, wow, you know, this person's awful. And they just want to build technology in a really unsafe way. And I think that there are entrepreneurs that will sit there with their sort of the other hat on and think, how might what I'm building, how might there be bias in the algorithms? How can I mitigate against that? And so, you know, I often meet people who are very, very thoughtful about these things. They want to innovate, as you said, and they want to move the dial and progress. But at the same time, yes, they want to do it safely. But that is regulation's there for that, right? It's to capture those areas where actually there needs to be a boundary, as you said, and a safety net, and to ensure that there is essentially what they want is no harm done, right?
You talk in your book about potential for bias in relation to AI in education, don't you? And you loosely touched upon this there, but do you have any specific examples of how this is being addressed at the moment from a regulatory or a company standpoint in terms of governance within companies who create AI technology? What is being done to ensure bias isn't an issue right now, from what you're seeing?
So that's really interesting, because I think that's where this has to develop further. I think that there's an example of a company in the education space that recommends careers. But because I understand how this technology is developed, you know, one of my first questions was, well, how do you do that? Where's your data set from? And the CEO said, you know, we just trawl LinkedIn and we trawl all these sites. And I thought to myself, but there's bias inherent in that data. You're talking to somebody who was told she couldn't be a barrister because she's female, brown, and not smart enough to go to Oxbridge. So I'm just sort of, you know, and I think that what is there in place that is stopping that company from creating that application to recommend careers to people? You know, if you look like me, or, you know, whatever it is, your background, your demographic, where you live, what you look like is not common in a certain career. And this is a real problem in technology, for example, where, you know, we don't have, there's not gender parity in technology and in lots of different careers. It's just gonna end up making the situation far worse. So there is, you know, that there is a real example of where you could see a problem. Now, this is why, sort of going full circle as to how we started, and what excites me about ChatGPT is because the best way to stop that from happening is for consumers to be more understanding and wary about how these technologies are built, because then they won't use technologies like that.
Yeah.
If you have a career recommender that is where its entire training data is actually current careers, it will be wrong. I mean, I just think that's wrong. So this is where consumers need to be very aware of what they're buying and what they're using.
Sure. Is
there a regulator where that exists right now? I'm sort of scratching my head trying to think about that. So, no.
Well, I don't think it is it? I think it's just such a new space.
That's the issue. And you've got this regulation chasing innovation. But I think it's really, really important. You know, there's a gap in the market here for people to create mass kind of public education, if you like, on this area. You know, but how would that work? How would it be deployed? Are people interested? Is it the media's responsibility to draw attention to these things? There's all these questions that we need to ask. But again, I just think the biggest defense, the best defense, is for the mass public to be aware. How many people will look at two systems and understand which one is sending you recommendations based on what? Do you know why versus another? The problem is that, you know, that some organisations are not clearly explaining how their recommendations are made. So, for example, for our technology, we go through schools, and, you know, on your website, you can quite easily say, this is what it's doing. You can use the term artificial intelligence. And I think that that's just about being really, really clear about how the technology and the platform works.
Yeah, I tell you, a really good example of this, Priya, is the insurance sector, in terms of how insurance premiums quotes are made. There was an issue a couple of years ago where if you had certain surnames from certain areas, from certain backgrounds, you'd have a more expensive premium, you know? But like, even if you had a better record as a driver, you know, which is obviously ridiculous. So there
was the gender one as well, right? So there was the female drivers would have higher premiums as well at one point. And so, you know, that there has been public backlash in situations where companies have operated in a certain way where it is clear that they are discriminating against a certain category of person, right? If you want to call it that.
Sure.
So, and there have been, and not just in AI and technology companies. Where is that when it comes to these platforms? You know, when there is a platform that exists and it's very, very clear actually that that there could be bias in there. What have they thought about their training set? But the only way that this is going to work is if, again, the consumers of technology, which is all of us, and those people who might not be the core demographic of, for example, even this podcast, right? But are you aware of how this is built? Are you aware of how it's making those recommendations? Because that is absolutely essential for us to be able to defend against bias in these sorts of systems. If entrepreneurs, CEOs, and as great as some of the intentions are, that it is known that, okay, well, if that's the way you're going to build this, people won't buy it, then no one will invest in it and they won't build it. But there needs to be that knowledge. And that is, again, education. It's education for all of us as to how these technologies work. And so this is why I think education is it's obviously fundamental, but we mustn't just think of formal education, you know, primary, secondary schools, colleges, and then universities. We've got to be thinking about education, lifelong education for all of us as these technologies rapidly advance and develop.
Which brings us back to critical thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Priya, one question we always ask our guests is, looking back now at your career, what advice would you give to your 21-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
My 21-year-old self? Oh my gosh, just have another cocktail and enjoy yourself now. So, It's one of those funny things. I just, my father's always sort of brought us up to say, look, don't live with any regrets, you know, and that's why sort of when we've got an idea, it's sort of built into me and my brother that, you know, just go for it and try your best and work really hard. Just carry on. I think the most important thing is just kindness. I think it's how I was raised. Sometimes I do sit there and I just think, why, particularly because social media gives a megaphone to certain people, or particularly when you're putting yourself out there and you're putting yourself in a very, very difficult position. You're pitching and you're going and you're talking about ideas, and you sit there and just think, I don't understand why can't everybody who wants to challenge and disagree, which is absolutely fine, just always still do it with kindness and respect. I think that's really important. And so, and you sometimes question what's going on in the world, and particularly when you see sometimes global politics, you know, what's happening. But no, it's just to remind my 21-year-old self that those values are still fundamental and nothing has changed. And although life is always through ups and downs, and we all have that both personally and professionally, just stick with the purpose. It's like an armor. It's an armor that takes you through the tough times. It helps you ride through the great times, and stick with the fundamental values of being a bigger person, be kind, be decent, all of that. Because the thing is, and Gareth, this sounds mad because maybe you wanted some tech and AI thing, but the fact is that it doesn't matter. You know, what really, really matters is those fundamental values, because if you have those and you can stick with them, no matter what you see and what people say, then I think it's really about living that fulfilled life. And you will then trailblaze, you will try and solve problems, you will try and move the dial in some positive way. And that's really all that matters. That, you know, with social media, I think there's so many benefits to it that even I don't sometimes appreciate, that I hear other people talking about. I really welcome challenge, and particularly with artificial intelligence, it's controversial. There are people who are very, very worried about sort of dystopian future, and as you should be, you know, and you should ask those questions, and you should challenge, and you should talk about the ethics, and we all should, and that's incredibly important. But treating each other with kindness is surely, given everything that we're seeing in the world, just the most important thing that we can do.
Absolutely agree. Brilliant. Priya, I really hope you change the world.
Well, no, thank you. I'm going to try, but I'll die
trying. I'm sure you will. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a privilege and a pleasure.
Thank you.
So, Kerensa, that was amazing. Priya is such a character, isn't she? And such a brilliant communicator.
And she's such a driven person. And, you know, because her core her core purpose is trying to make the world a better place. She is relentless in her focus.
Oh, yeah.
It's such an inspiration. I think it's such a treat for anyone listening to hear her. It's just fantastic to hear her journey.
And I genuinely think she will change the world. I think she is just a vibrant character. I'm not going to forget interviewing her in a while. No. It was a joy to chat to her. But, you know, in terms of things that really stood out for me personally, Kerensa, I'm not sure what stood out for you. But I think the question you asked around new skills, I thought she answered that brilliantly. And also as well, the bit around citizen journalists. Yes. And trust is such a huge problem in this world of technology and artificial intelligence, isn't it? And knowing what sources to trust and all that kind of thing. And obviously, you know, Priya was talking about how AI potentially can help us with that, being more data driven and stuff like that. I thought that was a really positive contribution and something that I hadn't really thought about AI in those terms.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And just the emphasis on data and the need for humans to be able to know how to use data and be able to employ those critical thinking skills that, for me, really punch through as a central theme. But also just her personal resilience. I think it's a fantastic role model. You know, she's a working mum. She's changing the world. She's done it with food. Yeah. She's now doing it with education. So she's kind of nutrition, education. She's changing lives. And the fact that she's had to keep bouncing back when she's facing bias and prejudice and all sorts of things, but she keeps going because of the sense of duty and responsibility she has to her team members. And that was really, just for me, a really wonderful story to tell. The fact that she has her members of staff and she's there, she shows up as a chief exec, she's in the room, and she's doing it for them. She's doing them for all of the millions of people around the world that she's serving.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if you knew this already, Kerensa, but when I was quite enamored with her talking about where this actually comes from, being faced with real inequality. Inequality in Nairobi is a different level, isn't it? And she saw that firsthand when she was there. And that's clearly something that stayed with her and is a big driver for her through her entire life. So I think this whole changing the world for the better through education and technology, I think it feels like that was fueled by this disgust for the enormous amount of inequality and, just the unfair nature of the economic system sometimes that she witnessed. So I thought that was a really powerful part of the interview.
Yes, and then from that, really, the democratizing effect of technology as well, if it's used wisely and well. Technology can be an incredible enabler. And I really enjoyed the section where we talked about the regulatory landscape and Patrick Vallant's recommendations. I just think that review is really important, and it will stay with us for many, many years to come, I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great start to the AI series. Oh, and by the way, Inadequate by Priya Lakhani as well. The book is a great read. I would absolutely recommend it. Check it out. And I will look forward to you joining us for the next installment of the AI series of the Tech Leaders Podcast.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gareth.
As you quite possibly have heard me mentioning in the past, we record the mass majority of our episodes at an amazing studio facility here in Cardiff at Tramshed Tech. Tramshed Tech is a collaborative community of entrepreneurs and scaling businesses geared towards supporting growth in tech, digital and creative industries across an ever-increasing collection of locations and partner locations, UK-wide and internationally. It really is the perfect place for your business to start up, scale up, accelerate or innovate. Head over to tramshedtech.co.uk or just search Tramshed Tech on your favourite social media platform.